So we have a bit
Okay.
of time now left for questions. We have some questions that were submitted in advance of today's session, so thank you for those, and some have been submitted as we go along. So if you're happy, Michael, I'll just kick straight into the questions.
I'll do my best, thank you.
Okay, so we have a question asking from a sales perspective, does exporting services or tech differentiate in any way from exporting goods?
I think the first part of the answer to the question is yes, and that services tend to have often intangible features and benefits, which in some respects aren't necessarily immediately apparent. And the great challenge for me in a value proposition when working with service businesses is to differentiate between tangibilizing is the challenge. Tangibilizing applies to both goods and services. So if you're supplying machinery, if you're supplying kit, if you're supplying a service, they both have both tangible and intangible benefits to them. So for example, if you're supplying motor parts, stock holding is terribly important, but some people would say, well, that's a very physical thing. But I'd say, but the logistics of getting parts out same day, next day, so therefore response times can be intangible. But I say, no, it's not tangible. A, do you have the stock? B, do you have the logistics infrastructure? And C, can you get it to me at my destination within 24 hours? There's nothing intangible about that. So in answer to that, I think the answer is yes, in that goods and services differentiated by services are quite often intangible. But I'm going to make a confession here. I trained as a behavioral psychologist, and one of our rules is that we must tangibilize everything. So anything that's abstract, we must try to describe it, to quantify it, to measure it, and to illustrate it. And that's the great challenge within a value proposition for services.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Michael. Moving on to the next question, and this is in relation to identifying competitors. Which free tools can be used to identify your online competitors?
Okay, which free tools? Well, I suppose there's a number of tools that are quite literally ready to be picked up and don't have a cost in terms of investment cost, i.e. you don't have to pay money for them, but they're very valuable. But all of them require an investment in time and effort. And the first one obviously is online desk research. There's a huge labyrinth of online desk research available in terms of competitors, who they are, where they are, both in terms of their profiles, their websites, their material, but also when you look at organizations like InvestNI, you have the Business Information Center, which is again a labyrinthine market information source, which is first class. And I've been using it for 25, 30 years with great effect. And that can be very effective in generating customer information, competitor information, and general market information. Thirdly, what I would say is if you Google competitor analyses templates or competitor advantage templates, you'll come up with a myriad of different formats that you can use, which are generally about saying who are the main competitors, what is it that they do, what is it that they do that we don't do, what is it that they do in terms of price and service that we don't do. And particularly when you're considering exporting, it's very important to do a competitor analysis to avoid self-referencing, simply saying, well, what we do at home will work overseas. And there's a lot of really reliable and valuable templates I would commend to you. The fourth one probably is good old-fashioned desk research, which is get to know the competitors' products, understand what it is that they do. I've had this experience very, very recently, whereby in analyzing a competitor's products, we looked at some of their pricing. And what we discovered when we did a bit of looking further, we found that their pricing was trade pricing, which showed an awful lot of discount, and there was discount available. And what we discovered was that the quoted price was quite often not the end price. And in another example, the client would quote a base price, but what we discovered was that that base price didn't include services, delivery, materials, and ongoing servicing. So therefore, we were able to differentiate our product from their product. So that required an awful lot of research. So in short, there's lots of free tools out there. And in addition to that, it requires an application of time to start digging this information out. But yes, a lot of really good companies have very, very good competitor information you tend to find, and have carried out a competitor analysis.
Thank you, Michael. You mentioned there, Michael, the quoted price is not always your end price. And that links back obviously to what you talked about in your session there about your price objection log, and there can be 30 to 40% differences in price. You discussed that. So is it difficult working with companies? Is it a hard thing to work towards more actual pricing or being fully upfront? Or in some industries, is it the norm that there's a starting price that's very much anticipated it's going to be different to your end price? And how do you close that gap from the start?
Okay. Well, the honest answer, Deborah, is it depends. Some sectors work on a very black and white basis. And if I take it to one extreme, tendering and bidding to, let's say, public contracts or private corporate contracts, you quite often find that you will be able to price and price once as per a very specific specification. And that's a very, very, very competitive approach. There's then a negotiated settlement whereby you'll be allowed to put your price in and come and negotiate it. And the honest answer is it depends. And so much of it has to do with your confidence in arguing. If you quote 30K or 3K for something and someone quotes 20K or 2K for something, there's a difference. And the challenge for me is to say, can you, using the value proposition, justify where the difference comes from? And I'm a great advocate of meeting price objections head on, so that if someone said, you've quoted me 30, I've got 20, you're going to lose this opportunity because I will buy the 20. And my standard response is, great, let's have a look at where the £10,000 of difference came from. May we see the quote? People say to me, you honestly ask for another person's quote? And I say, yes, let's have a look at it. The client can always decline, and that's perfectly acceptable.
Okay. Thank you. If you're happy, we'll move on to another question. This is a question, Michael, that has come through during the session.
Okay.
And this delegate is saying thank you for this. This seems like a very logical process. And they are asking a two-pronged question. What would you say to a startup company with regard to this process? For example, where to focus, etc. And also, how would a startup best get those first necessary customers or early adopters? So first part of the question, where would the focus need to be for a startup company in regard to this process? Where would they start? Where would they focus?
Okay. My experience in dealing with a lot of pre-start businesses and early start businesses and businesses that have recently gotten together, and that can be people who have quite a bit of experience, but it's a new enterprise. It might be a bunch of people who've gotten together who have industry experience. But the key thing for me is, before I even get the price, I always go to the first 2 points, which is, tell me what it is that you do. Tell me what it is that you do that's different. And then I move to risk. I say, explain to me what it is in my mind, work out what it is that I'm going to be wary about. Give me the reasons why I should be concerned. What is it that I should be concerned about, and how are you going to allay those concerns? So if someone says, I fear you may not have the technical experience to deliver this project, and quite often what I do is I reduce the risk by saying to people, okay, well, let's make a start by understanding what the issues are and what the challenges you have as a business. And quite often what I do is I'll say to people, let's take some time to consider what your challenges are. And it's one of the best ways of demonstrating your acumen. I'll quite often say to people, go to people and just say, let's have a chat and identify what your issues and challenges are. And let's have a look at what we think our product can do, so that instead of you actively selling the product, you can talk to the customer about how what you're offering can deal with a problem or a challenge that they have, if that makes any sense.
Thank you for that, Michael. Okay, we'll move on to...
May I just finish on that one, Deborah, by saying,
certainly, apologies.
Be proud of your price, but be prepared to defend it and do your research, because far too often what I find with a lot of pre-starts and new startup businesses is that they have a price proposition, but to win the business, they'll quite often compromise that by reducing the price. And what I do is the value proposition is, I always say to people, I want you to go to this meeting, and I want you to go to this meeting confident that you can be proud of your price, defend why it's the price that it is, and then be prepared, if necessary, to have a range of concessions to win the business to move forward with you in control.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Another question that has come through on this session, and it relates to the time allocation. You'd mentioned how often urgent overtakes important, and yes, I think we can all understand, and particularly obviously in the environment within we're all working at the present time. So a question coming through is, so your suggested reboot of 80 to 100 hours is a considerable time commitment, especially as it's unlikely to be in a 2 to 3 week block. If your
That's right.
brand company is performing well in sales, it can be a tough sell to senior management to allocate as much time as this, particularly if there are multiple product or service lines. Have
Sure.
you, Michael, any hardline or client examples of figures that would help justify this? For example, you know, increased sales of 10% or increase in margins for a particular client. So how can sales professionals help persuade their senior management that this is something that should it should have time allocated to it and will see hard results?
Well, first of all, again, I do apologize. As a behaviorist, I'm not going to suggest an actual number. But what I am going to say is, where I always start is, I say to people, look, we've two options. We can do something or we can do nothing about this. Now, do you think doing nothing about this will keep us where we are? And people go, what do you mean? You go, well, okay, if we don't think about what we do and the differences that it represents in the mind of the customer and take some soundings from the customers, from our own team internally, is it okay not to spend any time on this, thinking that the way we've done things will do? And people will invariably go, well, no, because things have changed. Things have changed utterly, and things are going to change utterly in various markets in various ways, and things are going to become a lot more competitive. Do you believe that doing nothing is an option? And people will quite often say, well, no. And they go, okay, well, let's make a start. Let's not allocate 80 hours. Let's allocate some hours. Let's allocate some time to this, and then begin modestly. And the phrase that I quite often use is, I quite often say to people, let's make a start. Let's think in parallel tracks. Okay, do we believe that our message of what we do is fit for purpose and good? And people go, it's perfect. And you go, great. Are the differentiating factors between us and the competition well defined? And people go, could do with a bit of polish. And you go, okay, well, could we allocate some time to that? Let's allocate an afternoon to think about that and break it down into a series of sessions, so that rather than saying we need to allocate 80 hours, I quite often start by saying, let's make a start. What's the most pressing issue we have? As you look down through those value items, and people will say, our pricing has gone slightly adrift and we need to rethink. And you go, okay, well, can we have a session and talk about our pricing in the mind of the customer and get some feedback, and then have a look at some competitive quotes? There's a place to start. So what I always encourage people to do is, don't try and book 80 hours of time, but be realistic about how long this will take, but make a start. And make a start by saying, could we just allocate a few hours? And then what you do on an internal promotional campaign, people will go, I get this, this is useful, you know. You go, yeah, well, let's do it. And then you move on to other areas. So my advice, I suppose, in summary is, little and often, probably the best way forward.
Okay, thank you, Michael. One question in relation to one of your final slides there listed your checklist top tips for moving forward. And one of the issues you mentioned was talking to lapsed or indeed lost customers. Have you any tips on how to approach customers that, or former customers that fall into that category? How practically do you do that successfully?
Well, in practical terms, what I quite often do is I take a very deep breath, and I abandon any semblance of pride, because it's not about being proud. It's about gathering information, and I make the request. I will ring the customer and say, look, we unfortunately don't do any business with you anymore, but we're having a rethink internally, and I'd love to get your opinion and your views. May I give you a ring? May I give you a call? Can I chat to you? And it is astounding how affable people are, and people are generally quite good at saying, yeah, I'll give you some feedback. And for me, I quite often start with that by just saying, make the call and say to them, we're having a rethink about how we do things. And we used to do business with you, but we don't anymore. Now, try and find out the reasons why. It could be something fairly significant that's going to be difficult to recover. But I've done this sometimes when I've rang some people and they've said to me, and I quote literally, where they've said, you have some nerve calling me. And I go, I know, and let me start with an apology. If this is inappropriate, that's fine, I'll hang up, but we're very keen to get your opinion. And quite often people will go, okay, and they'll talk. Other people are lapsed customers who just say, we just changed our direction and we stopped using you. Some people, alarmingly, will say, we kind of forgot why it was we did business with you in the first place, even though you were doing fantastic work below the line. And I suppose we just thought that you forgot about us. And that starts a great conversation. And in some cases, you might even recover the account by saying, well, thank you so much for the feedback. Now, I never try and recover a sale at that stage. I say, this is a research project, so thank you so much for the time. And I've had this where people have said, look, could we maybe get re-engaged and have a chat, or there's there something you could look at for us? And we go, yeah, sure, but that wasn't the objective of my call today. So I'll quite often start and have a process and a survey method for doing that.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for that.
Just very quickly, Deb, in terms of lapsed or lost customers, i.e. bids that we didn't get, I will quite often ring someone and say, look, we're devastated that we didn't get the business, but we're going to get over that. But moving forward, we'd love to derive something from the effort we put into quoting and engagement with you. And if you didn't mind, could we get some feedback? And people, again, are generally very affable. They say, can you tell me how far out we were, why we didn't get it, why couldn't you bring it? And some people will say, look, I'm sorry, I just couldn't get it over the line. I proposed you to other people in management, but they just didn't want to go forward. And you go, okay, so it's about how we promote our business to you and your team internally. And they go, yeah, but down the line, you might get some business, and you sometimes get some invaluable.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I think that is us through most of our questions there. Just one final question, maybe just to round up this session, Michael. So obviously it's challenging enough, and there's a lot of work and a lot of time to be spent on this. What's the hardest bit, if you like, of developing your value proposition, and one key action would you recommend to start in the process? Obviously you've covered this during your session, but what's the biggest challenge? What's the scariest thing, if you like, for people working on this, and what is your first key action in the process?
For me, it's about having a template and about having, I sometimes call it an amnesty on blame. And by that I mean, I quite often say to people, we're here to learn about what we can do and what we can do better. So how can we do this better, and how can we do the best version of it? So what we quite often do is I just say, let's suspend any responsibility for who did or didn't do what. Why didn't we go to that exhibition? Why didn't we invest in a website? Why don't we have better social media? Why don't we have a better proposition that we present at meetings? Why aren't we better at online meetings? It's not about that. It's about just understanding that in the mind of the customer, that's important. So my absolute starting point is to say, start looking at your business from the customer's point of view using the toolkit provided. And make a start, even if it's just get together for a couple of hours and kick it about, an hour even, and just start the process.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. We'll now wrap up our question and answer session there. So everyone, our webinar now is almost finished, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Michael from the Sales Practice Ireland for presenting this morning. We tried to get through most of the questions there, and we hope that you found the session useful. If you were not able to get your question answered today, we continue to update our business website, nibusinessinfo.co.uk, and you'll see the details on the screen, hopefully in front of you, and it will have the latest guidance, advice and FAQs. To receive updates from that website, sign up for the email newsletter. Today's webinar was the 7th in our Practical Export Skills series. The next webinar, also delivered by Michael, is Practical Export Skills, Planning and Delivering Effective Online Meetings. And that session is this Thursday, the 30th of July at the same time, 11 o'clock. You can register for it and the rest of the series on investni.com/events. And should you wish to be notified of the latest events, news and support from InvestNI, and if you're not already, then please ensure that you've signed up for our 2-minute update email newsletter. And again, you'll see the contact, the appropriate address in front of you there. So that's it for today's session. I would like to thank you all for attending. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.